Enjoyed our opening hour as we broadcast live. I love doing radio shows from here because the atrium at the College of Aviation, everybody should see this campus at one point. It's beautiful. There's construction. There's a lot of life here. And Senator George Lemieux, in a complete hour interview, we took calls, we had people speak, and then we got email questions as well. Now, she's back to visit with us, our good friend, Sandra Adams. Representative Adams is running for Congress, District 24. And in fairness, we want to make sure the audience knows that we have invited both sides to make appearances here at Embry-Riddle. Representative Adams, for their years in Tallahassee, is running for Congress in District 24. She joins us now live today on WNDB. And Representative Adams, on a very busy day, thank you for coming by to visit with us once again.
Thank you for having me.
I want to take an opportunity here. And by the way, thank you for staying, Alicia, by the way. If anybody in the audience would like to ask a question or make a comment, we're going to take some of those here since the audience is still here from the Senator Lemieux appearance. I want to ask you to clarify because there's a lot of misinformation out there. Your opponent has said that you want to raise taxes. Is there anything in any plan that you have that would actually involve raising taxes so that we can be clear?
No. And that's just what I feel is a desperate attack from a desperate person to go out and try to scare the Americans and especially Floridians and say that I am intending on doing something as what I consider absurd. If you go to my website, if you've ever been at any functions or even spoken to me, you know that I'm for less taxes, less government, have advocated for less taxes, less government, so that's an absolutely false statement.
We went through some transcripts trying to look for anything that might have brought that out, and the only thing I could find was I think you said you were at least open, if not fully supportive, of the fair tax. That involves a 23% tax. Could that have been what was taken out of context?
Well, I'm sure that she would like to use that out of context, but the fair tax is instead of an income tax and all the other taxes that this government and the federal government has imposed on the American people. The fair tax was just one simple tax, and it's not in addition to any of the taxes that are being paid today. It would be instead of type situation.
So are you a supporter of the fair tax concept?
I believe we do need a simpler tax code, and I believe that is one good option for the American people.
Okay, I'm not trying to nail you down here, but I am. Fair tax, flat tax, or you want to hear all of it?
I would tell you that I think the fair tax is a good start.
Okay, let's move to health care. Senator Lemieux told us in his interview earlier that 69% of small business will not be able to meet the criteria as established by Obamacare. Elected to the House, what do you foresee as a way to fix what most American business people and people in the private sector consider to be a healthcare mess? What would you advocate doing if you're elected?
I think the first step is you're going to have to unfund it, because I don't believe this president and this administration will allow us to repeal it. But I think the first step is to unfund it, then move forward with a repeal, and then replace it with true reforms. This health care bill, as it was passed, is riddled with taxes, tax increases that my opponent did vote for. And it is not, in my eyes, a health reform bill. Whenever a bill starts out with hiring more IRS agents instead of health care providers, then I would consider it a taxing bill instead of a health care bill.
Let me go to expenditures and budget. We talked with Dick Armey, who is the former House Majority Leader. You're well aware of his work as well. He's advocating rolling back spending. That, too, is one of these things that's being distorted in the campaign season by people. Do you advocate rolling back expenditures to any level? Does anything come to mind? Do you have a plan for rolling back? Should we go back to 2007? Should we go back to 2008? Do you have any plan like that?
I think that we need to stop the spending. We don't have a tax problem, we have a spending problem. We're taxed enough. It's the spending out of Washington that we have a problem with. And I believe that there is a way to curtail that spending, and we do need to reduce that spending. And I've heard two options, one the 2007 budget year and one the 2008 budget year. I'm open to looking at both of them. I think we need to get into those base budgets of those agencies, the bureaucracy that has grown out of these agencies. What is core mission of these agencies, what is not, what is duplicative spending, what is not. And, you know, in Florida, we saw where there were agencies doing the same work, and we were paying 2 agencies, and we started whittling that down, and we are trying to get control of that in the state of Florida, and well on our way, and I think the federal government needs to do the same thing.
If you have a question from the audience, raise your hand. Alicia will come to you with a microphone, and you can ask your question. It's a very short amount of time we have with the representative. And for phone calls at 239-0033, you'll talk with Phil Kincaid, and you're on the air with us. From the audience, your question for Representative Adams.
Okay, my wife and I both worked at the Kennedy Space Center back in the 60s when we had a period of tremendous growth, a lot of technical advances. I mean, our heads were spinning. There was so much going on during that one short period of time because of the Apollo project. And now we're seeing kind of the reverse situation where it looks like they're dismantling the program and all these advances are going to be brought to a halt. Now, I know both you and your opponent have said that you're for the space program, but I'd like to know how you differ from her, the position you're taking on what you would do about the role of NASA.
Well, I believe that we haven't seen a long-term vision for our space program. We've seen some very short-term things coming out of this administration, and as you know, a bill just was passed, and what we were told is that it's going to extend it for a short period of time. But that still doesn't catch us in between the gap that's going to be created. And while my opponent seems to have accepted the fact that we should move to allow Russia or China to get us to the space station, I'm still not willing to do that. I believe that we have a great wealth of knowledge over in the Cape, and we need to maintain that. And we have the ability, if we're willing to work towards it. There's a lot of spending that's been going on in Washington, D.C., but unfortunately, when it came to our NASA and our research and development, and it's also a Homeland Security issue, NASA came up short.
Let's take a phone call from Port Orange for Representative Sandra Adams. Derek, in Port Orange, you're on WNDP. Briefly, your question.
Good afternoon. A quick two-part question. I'm as an undecided independent, happy to hear about cutting spending. But I have a two-part question. One is, how do we take that seriously when I hear you criticize the fact that they cut $500 billion from Medicare when that was really payments to private insurance companies to give the Advantage plans, not Medicare itself?
All right, let me get the answer to that, and then we'll take the second part of your question. Would you like to respond to that?
They took that funding from a trust fund, and that's funding that was paid into the system for a reason. And I really have concern that when we continue to take from our trust fund, our Medicare, and our Social Security, that it speeds up the insolvency to the Social Security program. So I have real concerns with that.
All right, I'll give you the second part of your question, Derek. If you can do it very quickly, we're limited on time. Go ahead.
Very quickly, how do we take cutting spending seriously when I saw your voting record that you voted to give professional sports teams money in 2007 to build stadiums and so forth and give away to those people, the rich?
All right. Did you, in fact, vote for sports stadiums? To give money for sports stadiums?
I voted for the budget, and I'm going to have to go back and look at that.
Okay. Our phone number is 239-0033, AT&T star 1150. We only have about 10 or 11 minutes with Representative Adams as she visits us quickly on campus. And by the way, the word's already out. They would like to give you a tour and show you the facility so you can see it for yourself.
It's an awesome facility, I'm sure.
On election night, State Representative Pat Patterson, who served with you in the House, told us that Representative Adams is the most knowledgeable person in the legislature on matters of Homeland Security. That brings forth this question from me. If you're elected, and since you've already publicly stated that you do not want to increase the budget, the size of the budget, do you advocate retooling monies to further fund Homeland Security, or do you think that the levels that we are perhaps funding Homeland Security are adequate?
Again, when we get into the budgets of these agencies, I think what we need to do is, one, find out what they're spending on, how they're spending, and then if it needs to be retooled, then that's what you do. What we found a lot in our agencies were that some agencies were getting spending or funding that they really didn't need that level of funding, so we were able to lower that funding and move it to an agency or a division that needed it, such as within the purview of where I am. Currently, I chair the Public Safety Criminal Justice Appropriations Committee. One of our agencies was getting funding for something that we could not identify, neither could the agency, so we removed the funding and we moved that towards the education budget. So I think there are ways to do it, but you first have to get into the base budgets of these agencies.
Like you, I'm always working. I even scribble notes on the back of bank notes here. I was listening to you on a broadcast on 90.7 yesterday with your opponent, the incumbent, and when it came to an issue of health care, I believe you said that you would like to see health care be allowed to cross state lines. Can you elaborate on that?
Health insurance.
Health insurance.
Yes. We've always thought that the best way to do it is, we were founded on free market system. That's what we are. That's how we were founded. And to allow people to purchase insurance across state lines, it gives the competition, and it usually lowers the cost. Right now, currently, you can't purchase your health insurance across state lines.
Would this also mean that we would need to add that perhaps to the health care bill, or do you think that could be done with some sort of an order by Congress?
Well, I don't like orders by Congress, I guess, is because I believe that we need to vote on it, and the people need to understand and see what's being voted on, because after all, it is going to affect them and their everyday lives. So I believe that it needs to be discussed. I think it should have been part of this piece of legislation, but as we both know, a lot of discussion wasn't held. Near the end, the bill came back and it was voted on very quickly. No amendments were allowed to be placed on it. And for the most part, I don't believe anybody that voted yes on the bill actually had a chance to read it or took the time to read it.
We're going to take, if anyone has a question here, we'll just raise your hand. Alicia will come to you. In the meantime, while we're looking for that person, let's go to Tom in Ormond Beach. Your question for Representative Sandra Adams. Hello.
Yes, I would like to know your biggest idea for cutting expenses. Example, wiping out a whole agency, Department of Education, Department of Energy, etc., and I'll take your answer off the air.
Is there an agency or a department that stands out that you think is prime for cutting?
I think that every government agency needs to be able to justify their budget. They need to, there needs to be proper oversight, and I believe I saw somewhere where Representative Posey, Congressman Posey, has a piece of legislation that says that there's going to be true oversight of these agencies, looking at their budget, especially their base budget. A couple of years ago, I believe it was in '09, they went in and upped the base budget without a whole lot of discussion with these agencies, and I believe that that was probably a mistake. We need to get into these agencies. We need to get into the bureaucracy. A lot of times the money that is allocated to these agencies ends up in the bureaucracy instead of what it was really intended to do.
Representative Adams is our guest here at the College of Aviation Atrium on the grounds at the campus of Embry-Riddle, live on WNDB. We're taking your phone calls for the next few minutes at 239-0033, AT&T star 1150. Then after a break, we'll talk with former Congressman John LaBoutier, our assembled audience here at the College of Aviation. If you have a question, raise your hand. Alicia will be able to mic you. Alicia, we have one out here. Want to ask a quick question while Alicia gets in position. Would you advocate increased opportunities for offshore drilling as a partial solution to America's thirst for oil?
I think that we first need to know what happened that night in our Gulf. And as you've heard me say, we lost 11 lives that night. We definitely need to know what happened, and those families of those loved ones that they lost need to know what happened that night. But if we can do it safely, yes, we need to be drilling, because we have other countries drilling off our shorelines off of the coast of Cuba and again in the Gulf of Mexico. So I believe that as long as we can do it safely, that we need to look into it.
Let's go to the audience. Your question or comment for Representative Adams.
Yes, Representative Adams. In Tallahassee, for a great deal of time, Florida's been dealing with immigration here. So when we hear over and over, well, we first need to secure our borders, from your experience, how do you see that term?
Well, I believe that it is an accurate statement. We do need to secure our borders. Our borders are very porous. We have people coming across the borders, and not everyone coming across the borders are looking for a new way of life or a better way of life. There are some that are actually crossing the borders to do us harm. And we do need to have an understanding of who's coming across the border and for what reason. And that's one of the first steps you'll have to take in order to do anything with our immigration issues.
Would you, if elected to Congress, advocate a policy for illegal immigration that mirrors what Arizona has experienced?
Actually, we have immigration laws on the books, Mark. You and I have talked about this. I want to advocate that we enforce the laws that are on our books, our federal laws. And that's the reason why Arizona created their laws, because the federal government fell down. They fell down on the job. They weren't doing what they were supposed to be doing. They haven't been enforcing the laws that they have on the books.
This area is experiencing what many, Representative Adams, are going through, and that's the possible closing of services such as postal offices. And no doubt your staff has briefed you on what's going on up here. The post office has been hemorrhaging red ink, as you well know, for a number of years. They were just turned back in an attempt to raise postal rates once again. Do we need to aggressively, as a nation, move postal delivery to the private sector?
Well, I think that, as you've seen, there's been many companies that are now doing postal or delivery services, and it's competition, and that's how we were founded. We are like I said earlier, we're a free market system. That's how we were founded, and I think that the system will work itself out if allowed to. And so we do have private ventures, we have public ventures, and we just allow it to work its way out. And if it can't survive in this market, in a free market system, then it's what it is.
I want to ask you about human rights violations. China, which has human rights violations rampant, when they built for the Olympics, they kicked people off their property so that they could make this giant Olympic stadium area. Jim DeMint said, how tough can you be when the person you're yelling at is your banker? If you're elected to Congress, would you advocate that is there any way that we can get a message across to China effectively about human rights violations there when they hold so much of the paper in this country? Do you think that we have any room to negotiate human rights issues with China, given how much they owe over here? That's the question.
I think that we always must advocate for human rights. Whether they hold our paper or not, it's something that we must do. It's the right thing to do.
If it comes to you about a possible second stimulus, would you advocate or would you entertain any discussion for a second stimulus package if it came to you as a member of Congress?
No, I would not.
Anyone in the audience, in the few minutes that we have left, I've got a chance for one more opportunity in the back, Alicia, and also for your phone calls at 239-0033. I have a couple of minutes left for Representative Adams. One more question from the back, sir. A question for Representative Adams.
This may be a more mundane question, but with more and more people are going to be coming on Medicare, on my Medicare card is my Social Security number. Most major insurance companies have, for probably 10 years ago, moved away from Social Security number as an identification. It can be done, technically it can be done, and I'm wondering why we can't get Medicare, other than they say it costs too much, but why can't we get them to move away from that? I believe we'll have an ongoing problem with identity theft as more and more of the baby boomers finally come online for Social Security or for Medicare.
That's the first time I've heard that, is to move away from that, and I would entertain some of that information, and I would like to talk about that offline, if you wouldn't mind, because that's interesting. I will tell you that in the Florida House, I was one that advocated and passed a piece of legislation that allows citizens in Florida, the Floridians, if you want to secure your information, in other words, you can lock your credit, and there is information on how to do that. It did pass, and it is law in the state of Florida, and it was one of the tools in the toolbox to help you protect yourself against identity theft, because a lot of people have seen their identity stolen, and it's not just on a financial side. There are some people who are just law-abiding citizens that all of a sudden find themselves, for one reason or another, someone's stolen their identity, being arrested for something they didn't do. And it's a financial, and it's also, it could be end up that they're having to carry around with them a letter from the law enforcement agency saying, look, this is not the person that is wanted, so please don't arrest them again, type of scenario.
One last question. Do you think, if you're elected to Congress, that Congress should move toward having the federal government get out of the public education business and have it run by the states?
I think that it is done best closer to the people, and I want to see a lot more participation with the parents, the teachers, and the local schools. What I've seen over the years is that it seems like further and further away people want to dictate what goes on in the classroom, and I will tell you that in the Florida legislature we have been trying to figure out a way to make sure that most of the funding goes into the classroom where the children are. We want to make sure that they're getting the lion's share of the funding, so to speak, so that they're getting the education that they so deserve.
Representative Sandra Adams, a candidate for Congress, District 24, our guest here at Embry-Riddle at the College of Aviation at the main atrium. Thank you so much for visiting with us.
Thank you.
For our radio audience, messages, and then we'll come back in a few minutes with John LeBoutelier from Newsmax.com.
Not every jeweler gets to display the Rolex crown. That's why we are proud of our designation as an official Rolex jeweler, because it shows that our dedication to quality and excellence meets the exacting Rolex standard. If you're considering investing in a Rolex,